Hi, everyone. Welcome to PhD Unlimited. My name is Stephanie Maroney, and I am the program manager at the Davis Humanities Institute for the Mellon Public Scholars Program, but I also coordinate and arrange this series, PhD Unlimited. So PhD Unlimited is a professional development series that takes a broad approach to what kinds of careers PhDs in the arts and humanities might have after graduation. So those kinds of needs that you might have around skill development, around building mentorship teams, but especially around grant writing, which is the topic of today's talk. We try to offer a wide variety of options for you within the PhD Unlimited series. So I wanted to let you know before we get started that there are 3 events, including this one, that are scheduled for spring quarter, and I will add the details in the chat. But our next event is on April 27th. It's always from noon to 1, and it's called Podcasting the Humanities, and it's going to feature 3 graduate students who receive funding from the National Humanities Council's the National Humanities Council's Podcasting the Humanities workshop. So they're going to share back about what they found and some tips if you're interested in turning your research into a podcast form. And then there's an event on May 25th, which is 12 to 1 again, called Building a Mentorship Team. And it's going to talk about how you might approach mentorship as a graduate student as more of a kind of network rather than one advisor. So I'm going to present some tips, but we're also going to feature feedback from faculty in the arts and humanities who've received the postdoctoral and graduate student mentorship award from Grad Studies. So stay tuned for those. But today we're very lucky to have Aury Washburn with us, who is the Training Grants Analyst and Coordinator in Graduate Studies and the UC Davis Office of Research. So Aury works for a unit called Interdisciplinary Research Support that coordinates and implements a variety of research development activities on campus. She's really the best person to give you this kind of information because her unit, which she may say more about, they've been offering a lot of really incredible workshops on how do you get started grant writing, what different funding agencies, what they want to see, what are the different components of grants. So I'm sure she'll give us some more information, but she's here today to really give us an intro, the kind of where do we even get started, which I hope will be helpful for you all as you move through your graduate career. So I'm going to turn it over to Aury now, who will give the presentation. And like I said, we'll have a Q&A at the end, but feel free to use the chat in the meantime. Welcome, Aury.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here and have a lot of information. I may have been a little bit ambitious in how much I wanted to share, but I am going to try to make sure we have some time for questions. And also, if you have any questions you put in the chat that we don't get to, I will make sure to address those and get responses back to Stephanie to be able to share with everyone who's here. Okay, so this is a little bit of a roadmap for what I wanted to share today. Kind of thinking through the process of starting from, I'm aware that I might want to write some grants and fellowships, but, what's the story up to actually writing and submitting proposals. So that's kind of just an overview of what we're going to look at. So starting from that very first question, what kinds of funding are available to support graduate students and postdocs? This is not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the common opportunities. And so these include things that aren't just grants and fellowships, but a variety of things as well that you may be familiar with or might be interested in exploring. So there are teaching and research assistantships, internships, institutional training grant programs, grad group or departmental grants and fellowships, competitive campus internal grants and fellowships, private sponsors, so foundation grants and fellowships, professional societies grants and fellowships, and federal and state grants and fellowships. So I'm going to talk a fair amount about the external grants and fellowships opportunities and developing proposals for those today. But we'll share a little bit of information about the other opportunities as well, and we can always address questions about those. So thinking about our grants and fellowships, specifically for graduate students and postdocs, there are some types that come up pretty frequently across different funding agencies or opportunities. And so sometimes these are a little bit, a mix of each, or there are other types, but it's helpful to kind of orient to these and then kind of go from there in terms of understanding what these awards are intended for. So graduate fellowships, or often called pre-doctoral fellowships, these are for early graduate training, so early in a PhD career. And these are going to be really focused on an individual's potential for future success. So there will be information probably about a research project, but a lot of information about training goals, as well as information about past accomplishments. So this is really demonstrating, I'm here and I'm starting my graduate career. This is what I'm interested in, and this is my potential. And so those awards are meant to fund development of that individual during that career phase. Dissertation fellowships, the name is fairly straightforward here. So this is going to be aimed at a dissertation project. So it'll be a little bit more focused on that specific research project, with some elements of how it fits into a career path, but really mostly focused on what's going to be happening in the dissertation project itself. And then postdoctoral fellowships are going to need a clearly outlined research project, but are also going to be about training. So why is it that you're going to pursue this additional postdoctoral training? What does that mean for a longer term career plan? And then travel and research grants are often, the most project-based of these different types we're looking at here. So they're going to be pretty specific to the actual travel or event or research project that you're proposing and looking for funding for. So the outline of the actual research project or travel activity will need to be really clear. Excuse me. There will be some information about how this fits into a little bit of a bigger picture in a lot of cases, but again, really focused on that specific activity that you're interested in funding. So this just gives us a little bit of an orientation to what might be happening with different kinds of grants and fellowships that we're thinking about. So as a graduate student or a postdoc, in terms of understanding funding types, some main goals might be to become familiar with different funding mechanisms that are available to you, and then also to create a community that encourages the discovery and communication of funding opportunities. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this moving forward, but it's really helpful to be sharing information that you're learning, or talking about these things within your academic community in order to just create a shared resource about funding opportunities for your work. So in terms of actually identifying these fellowship and grant opportunities, one primary resource is going to be your network knowledge. And so this is something that I really don't want to go to underemphasized. It can kind of get just under-considered, because this is a resource of individual knowledge and personal knowledge. But your professional network, so your cohort, advisor or mentor, or a mentoring team, or colleagues at other institutions, as well as departmental or group graduate advisors, these can be really fantastic resources for identifying fellowship and grant opportunities that might be really relevant to you. And so you can approach this, sort of casually, in terms of, you're already interacting with these people and just kind of seeing if they have any pointers as you're starting to look around for funding opportunities, or you can try to set up more formal meetings and, let them know that you're really trying to get some information, and could they share anything that might be relevant to you in terms of funding opportunities. There's some campus resources for this as well. So the Student Financial Support Team at Grad Studies has several resources for finding external fellowship opportunities. So one is this A through Z listing that you can search. You can see, you can look by discipline and by funding type. You could even search by agency if you're looking for something very specific. And so then you can look through a list of funding opportunities and see what might be relevant to you. They also have this list of resources, including search engines for fellowship and grant opportunities. I'm noting Pivot here, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more, but you can explore these and see if, again, they might be relevant to finding funding opportunities for your work. And then there are a number of other websites that will have lists of funding opportunities as well. So Academic Jobs Wiki has this, updates a list of dissertation fellowships. ProFellow has some lists of graduate fellowships. The PhD project has information about funding as well. So these are all places that you can look and, again, just start gathering information about what funding opportunities might be available to you. Professional societies will often have their own funding opportunities, so you can look at their websites or subscribe to listservs, and they often have social media accounts that you can check as well. So I mentioned I wanted to return to Pivot. Some of you may be familiar with Pivot. If you're not, this is a resource that's available at UC Davis. So by being a part of UC Davis, you have access to this database, and it's a fantastic resource. So I highly recommend that if you're not already familiar and comfortable with it, that you take some time. It does have a little bit of a learning curve. It has some strange quirks, but so it's really worth the time investment in figuring out how to use it in a way that's effective to you. It has a pretty large return on that investment. So I'm going to give just a few tips to get started for anybody who hasn't ever used it before. Again, if you have an account, but you're not really using it actively, when you sign into Pivot, once you've set up an account, you end up on this page that's there below on the bottom of this slide. And so it has this search bar that looks like that must be what you're supposed to be doing, is just typing things into that search bar. We actually recommend that you ignore the search bar completely. It's actually not that helpful unless you really understand how the Pivot algorithms work, which I don't know anyone who does. So you can ignore the search bar completely and instead go to this option right underneath the search bar. It says Advanced Search. So if you go to Advanced Search, you end up in a page that has a number of additional search boxes that might look attractive, but I would ignore all of those as well, and instead take a look at these drop-down menus below. So those are going to allow you to specify some criteria for search that will be really helpful in terms of creating a search that is really relevant to your options. So some places that I typically recommend starting with this are funding types. So that's where you could specify like a graduate pre-doctoral fellowship or a dissertation fellowship or a postdoc fellowship. Applicant type, so you can specify if you're a student, there are some other demographic characteristics there as well. So if it's a woman oriented award or a minority oriented award, you can include that information as well. If you're interested in including those in those terms in your search. And then keyword is where you would select information specific to your discipline. And so there are nested lists of broad disciplinary categories all the way down to sub-disciplines. So you can select those in order to curate a search. And once you've conducted a search, you'll get a number of results, and then you can kind of refine the search as you go. So I'll talk a little bit more about some tips for kind of refining a search as you go in a few minutes. but you can see that you would get a list of results. And if you're happy with the search that you conducted, you're like, wow, this is a really helpful search. You can actually save the search and set up a digest of weekly emails. So this is a really nice feature. You can actually conduct multiple searches and save them independently. So maybe you're a graduate student in the second year of your PhD career. So you're currently interested in maybe applying to pre-doctoral fellowships. So you make a search for pre-doctoral fellowships and you save that. But you're also looking a little bit ahead, thinking about dissertation fellowships. So you can make a separate search for dissertation fellowships and save that. And then you'll get one weekly email from Pivot that will give results in each of those 2 different searches that you have. So that's a really nice feature. Again, this is kind of the return on the investment of figuring out how to get the right searches for what you're interested in. If you find an opportunity that's especially interesting to you, so again, maybe I'm doing this search and I found a dissertation fellowship that looks really great, or it came in my Pivot Digest email, but I'm not quite there yet. I can choose to track this opportunity within Pivot, and then I'll get updates about any changes to that opportunity, or if they've re-released information about the request for proposals for that opportunity, or if the deadline has changed, then you'll get live updates about that. And you can also go into Pivot and kind of, select all of the awards that you're tracking and review things that way as well. So that's kind of how you can identify opportunities to begin with. But like I mentioned, I wanted to talk a little bit about the actual refining of the search process and getting from, I did a search that's relevant to me and generated a bunch of opportunities. How do I figure out which ones I actually want to apply for? So the approach that we recommend on the interdisciplinary research support team is called lead prospect match. So this starts with the lead part of the process. And here you're going to identify the funding search tools available to you. So maybe Pivot, and learn how to use them properly. And then you want to conduct a purposefully broad search of funding opportunities, generating a list of around 35 or maybe a little bit more potential grants that you could apply to for your project. So that search that I had up before, it was 700 results. You would need to do a little bit of refining as part of this process to get to the point where you're generating about 35 results. So these are going to be your leads. So this is kind of orienting you to a search or a method of information gathering that's giving you, things are in the ballpark of what you're interested in and might actually be useful for funding your research. The next part of the process is called prospect. So here you're going to take the list of 35 plus leads, and for each funding opportunity, review the agency's mission statement and the program's summary information. So here you're going to eliminate opportunities from agencies that don't fund your work based on the mission statement, or programs that don't align with your project goals based on the program summary information. And here the goal is to be narrowing from that list of 35 or more leads to a list of 10 to 15 prospects. And I have a note here. So this is kind of something that you need to be thinking about throughout, but it's especially relevant to this part of the process. You do not want to try to force your research project to fit a funding program. So you want to already have kind of developed a project that seems right to you, and then search for funding opportunities to support it. And this feels a little bit nuanced because there's a part of the proposal writing process where you need to really present your proposal in the way that best shows that it fits with the program and the agency that you're applying to, or whatever the funding source is. But you really do want to make sure first that you've established your general idea for your project and that you're looking for something that you already know is a good fit. So maybe they don't know that yet, and that's going to be the job of the proposal development. But you're not finding an opportunity that sounds great because it would be funding, and then trying to, kind of make something that isn't a good fit work. So that's a key piece of really identifying funding opportunities that are going to be relevant to you, and that you'll be competitive for. So the last piece of the lead prospect match is the match step. So here you're going to take the list of prospects and for each conduct a close read of their request for proposals. So this is something that you should be able to find for each funding opportunity. Sometimes it's called a funding opportunity announcement, an FOA. Sometimes it's called a request for proposals. Here you want to eliminate funding opportunities that poorly match your project needs and goals or don't fit your timeline or logistical requirements. And in this step, you're intending to narrow your list to just 3 to 5 matches. And these are going to be the funding opportunities that are best suited to your project. So these are the ones that you're actually going to consider potentially applying to. So I think we're going to go ahead and take a minute here as we're thinking about the different resources that you can use to identify fellowship and grant opportunities. And the idea being that you will probably want to be using all of these resources in some way. So I would definitely set up pivot searches, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't, be talking to your network and also looking at society, professional society opportunities and lists as well. So I want us to take a minute here and think about, in addition to your faculty advisor, who is one other person you can talk to on campus about finding funding opportunities for your field. And is there one person not at UC Davis you can talk to? And then what are 2 organizations or societies you can check out for lists of funding opportunities relevant to your field? So we'll take a minute. You can think about this, you can write it down. If you want to, you can throw it in the chat. We can share some ideas. Yeah, take a minute here. Okay, so Stephanie shared that she learned a lot by talking to grad students a few years ahead in her program, and I would say the same. That was an incredible resource for me as well. And then some societies to check out also. So if anyone else wants to share in the chat, you're welcome to. Again, this is, really best done as a community activity. There's going to be no disadvantage in sharing ideas about, where to find funding opportunities. Okay, so in terms of goals as a grad student or a postdoc, in terms of identifying fellowship and grant opportunities, you can subscribe to professional society listservs. You can create calendar reminders to check the grad studies website for new funding opportunities. You want to create a curated search and pivot that's appropriate for you and maybe for your cohort as well. And then again, like I just mentioned, as a group, you can generate a list of consistent recurring funding opportunities and their due dates that are relevant to your work. So next we're going to talk about developing plans. So developing a multi-year funding plan. And myself and my colleagues on the interdisciplinary research support team are really planners at heart. So we tend to advocate for starting as early as possible and trying to make a structured plan for yourself in terms of, considering timing and what might be realistic and possible, knowing that you'll likely need to make adjustments along the way. But generally speaking, the earlier you can kind of think about what a structured plan might be like for you, the better off you're going to be throughout your graduate student and postdoc career. So if this is not already something that that you enjoy doing, you can consider building that as a habit, as part of your professional development during this time. So something that might be helpful in terms of thinking about what a 5-year, and that's just sort of again, a general length of time you can adjust as makes sense for you. But something that might be helpful is considering which funding opportunities are appropriate for which career stage. So again, PhD careers can vary in terms of length. This is just one example. It'll vary both by individual and by discipline. But if you have a PhD career of around 5 years that has this kind of trajectory, this gives some idea of when you might consider applying to different kinds of grants or fellowships. So in year 1, you might consider pre-doctoral fellowships. Teaching or research assistantships for year 1 and 2 are very common. Toward the end of year 1 and moving into year 2, you might be interested in travel grants or small research grants. Moving, closer to the middle of your PhD career, you might be interested in grants to support research or internships. And then again, as you're working toward a dissertation, you might be interested in dissertation improvement grants or dissertation fellowships. And if toward the end of your PhD career, you're interested in pursuing a postdoc position, you might want to write a postdoc fellowship in that last year. So it's unlikely that any one person would apply to all of these different types of awards. It probably has happened, but I don't think it's common. But this does give you some idea of when it might make sense to be considering these different kinds of awards. Postdoc careers probably vary even more than PhD careers. There are some that are very short, 1 or 2 years, and some that are more on the scale of a PhD career. But just to give some general examples, if you are looking at a shorter postdoc, kind of all of the postdoc activities have to be happening at the same time. And it might be appropriate to consider developing and submitting career development awards or grants to support research at the beginning of the first or second year. And then because this is a shorter postdoc appointment, this person might be interested in pursuing an additional postdoc appointment, in which case they may want to write a postdoctoral fellowship proposal during their second year of that appointment. If someone has a longer postdoc appointment, the actual activities associated with the postdoc might be a little bit more spread out, and that person might consider applying for career development awards or grants to support research at a few different points. Other things to consider when you're thinking about planning, it's important to build in redundancy and contingency plans as possible. So you may want to be considering the possibility of and sort of exploring the ability to apply for multiple, for example, pre-doctoral fellowship applications, if that's something you're interested in, or dissertation fellowships. So this could be either, multiple submissions, if that's allowed. So I'm going to apply in my 3rd year with the possibility that I might resubmit in my 4th year, or different kinds of awards, knowing that you probably wouldn't be able to accept more than one, but you might be able to submit to more than one at a time. And just a note there that, different awards are different, and you will need to write proposals that are unique to each, that it's sometimes possible to recycle some pieces of things, and then again, you would be proposing the same project. So in addition to considering multiple proposal applications, you can also think about the funding opportunities like TA and GSR. You want to be considering your competitiveness when you're making plans. So some awards don't allow resubmission. I just mentioned that might be part of your redundancy and contingency plan, but some awards don't allow that. And this includes a lot of graduate student fellowships. So you want to make the most of the opportunity that you actually have. And I have a quote here from one of our external fellowship analysts at Graduate Studies. So this is actually specific to the NSF GRFP. So this is a STEM award, but the same logic would apply for any award that has this sort of criteria. So for this award, you can apply as a graduate student in either year 1 or year 2, but you only get one shot. You can't resubmit. So the question here is basically, I'm a first year or I'm a second year. Should I apply now or should I wait? So the response that Ryan shared was, if you're in year 2 and you haven't applied yet, apply. Because in this case, that's your only shot. You might as well. If you're in year 1, and that means that you could apply now or you could wait until your second year. So if you're in year 1, it really depends. If you have a reasonable track record of leadership, broader impacts, research outputs, and a good grasp on your project, apply in year 1 because your application will hopefully be judged more leniently. If you apply in the second year, the reviewers often look for a lot more to rank an application competitive. So more publications, preliminary results, a profound personal statement, an impeccable research plan, etc. So waiting to apply until the second year means you really need to be productive in year 1 of grad school. So again, this is, not a humanities award, but similar things will exist in that context. And so this is the kind of thought process that you want to be going through if you're starting early and making a plan and kind of weighing when it makes sense to apply for an award. And this is something that you could talk with other people about as well and get their experience also. You also want to make a note of other professional and personal activities that might compete with grant writing. So conferences or exams or things like parental leave. You want to be, again, realistic about what you're actually going to have time for. Honestly, it would be possible to be very busy and occupied throughout a PhD or postdoc career and not take on any grant writing. It's probably not advisable, but we know everybody's busy. So it's helpful to kind of think through these things ahead of time and when you're most likely to have the resources to dedicate to that activity. And then it's helpful also to identify and schedule periodic quarterly or annual training opportunities in grant writing. And I'll talk a little bit about campus opportunities for that in just a second. And then you also want to discuss funding ideas with your faculty advisor, or if you have a mentoring network. So things to consider there, sharing what kinds of awards you're interested in, specific awards that you've identified that appear to be a good fit, deadlines for the awards, and your proposed timeline for development, interest in any resources that they can provide or are aware of, and that might be fellowship or grant proposal development and review support. So can they actually participate and support you during those activities? Do they have contacts for past applicants or awardees? And do they have any example past proposal materials? So it's helpful in this context to bring as much information as you can to this kind of conversation. And then, that will give the best potential for them providing support for you through these activities. So I think I apologize. I think there's some color issues with this slide, but this gives you an idea of one thing that you can do as you're figuring out how to develop a multi-year funding plan. You can actually map it out. So I have 4 different kinds of activities on this calendar. And again, it doesn't have to be 5 years. It can be whatever makes sense for you. But this includes fellowship and grant proposals, UC Davis requirements and commitments, conferences and workshops, and job applications. So it may make sense to do actually everything except fellowship and grant proposals first, because you're going to have likely less control over the timing of those, and then see if you can identify windows where it makes sense, where you would likely, have, again, the resources, the time, and the availability to work on grant writing. So on this example, I actually have a pre-doctoral fellowship application, a dissertation fellowship application, and I think a postdoc fellowship application as well. And so again, that may not be realistic for you based on both your professional and personal commitments. So that's an example, but you can put things on there and then kind of see what it looks like. And this is also something that you could draft and bring to an advisor or mentor and discuss with them, see if they think it looks realistic, if they have suggestions for alternatives, etc. So this can be a really helpful tool. And one thing that I do have noted on here for every year is the UC Davis internal fellowship competition. So I'm going to share a little bit of information about that. So this is an opportunity for both actually prospective and continuing grad students. Unfortunately, this is not available to postdocs right now. But what this is one internal UC Davis application that you would submit that allows you to apply for up to 42 fellowships. And new funding mechanisms are being added to this all the time. So 42 was when I last checked. It might be more. And this is an attempt to, really streamline the ability to apply for these internal fellowships. So this application includes a statement of purpose and a personal history statement, 3 letters of recommendation, and a UC Davis transcript. And the applications are peer reviewed by faculty. And every year there are fellowships on this list that have no awardees. So this is obviously being underutilized if there are fellowships that just aren't awarded because no one applied. So there's really no reason not to be building this into your plan and your timeline. It's a fairly light lift as far as fellowship applications go. You do want to give yourself some time, especially since you need letters of recommendation. So you want to make sure that you give those individuals a heads up. But again, I'd highly encourage everyone to consider applying for this. The deadline is usually in January, so it's something that you can start thinking about in the fall. This is the deadline for this past year, so it'll likely be updated in the coming months. But again, no reason not to apply for this every year. I have 2 colleagues on the interdisciplinary research support team who both did PhDs at UC Davis in the humanities and received fellowships through this process. So I have another activity for us here, but I think I'm going to actually skip that in the interest of trying to get some Q&A time. So this is something that you can think about on your own, thinking about what kinds of awards are going to be most important to you now and then in the next few years. And then if you're really still not sure about that, what kinds of resources do you think you can use to try to figure that out? So in terms of developing a multi-year funding plan, goals as a grad student or a postdoc would be to download, customize, or create a 5-year plan template for yourself. Even if you're not planning to share it, it's a good exercise to go through. But the second goal is to schedule a meeting with your advisor, grad program liaison, or another mentor to discuss the 5-year plan. And then staying accountable, so maintaining your time management for all aspects of your graduate and postdoc career. And again, this is, you know that there's always going to be some adjustment and some things that change along the way, but the planning up front tends to be really helpful and valuable, and actually allows you to be a little bit more adaptive and flexible while still achieving the main milestones that you want to. So next I'm going to talk a bit about writing, actually writing proposals. So something that's always helpful for me to kind of revisit throughout a proposal development process and kind of check in and make sure that I'm doing this is to know your audience and to make your pitch early and clearly. And so again, like I said, I go through iterations, I'll draft, and then I'll come back to this and think about how can I improve my response to these 2 points. So you need to make sure that you're aligning your project with the goals of the program. And like I mentioned earlier, you should have selected a program that aligns with your project to begin with. So that's key. You don't want to be trying to fit a project that isn't actually appropriate for the goals of the program. But your job now, as you're developing and writing, is to really show reviewers what you already know, that your project fits well with the program. So how can you best demonstrate that to them? So some things that are helpful are identifying the type of funding that's available from the sponsor, finding the agency funding priorities, or at least your discipline's grand challenges. So what are they stating are their priorities? Determine what's been funded previously, and talk to someone knowledgeable of the program. So someone who's applied or been funded, or someone at the program. And so throughout this is kind of good information collection, again, about how you can present the fact that your project fits really well with the program. So this can be even on the level of noting what kind of language the funding agency uses most frequently. So you might notice that there's a word that they use, and it applies to a concept that you use as well, but typically you use an alternative. So that's a place where you would want to make sure that you're trying to incorporate excuse me, the wording and the language that the agency uses to, again, demonstrate that your project fits really well with what they're already interested in. Something that is important to consider for all different kinds of proposal development, so this is not just grants and fellowships, but any kind of proposal development, is what we call the proposal development trifecta. So you want to make sure that you're addressing each of these 3 pieces: project, person, and place in your proposal. So some considerations for that: in terms of your project, you want to articulate what you're trying to do, including your objectives, using absolutely no jargon. So keeping in mind that reviewers are often not going to be from your specific subfield. So you need to be able to communicate the ideas in ways that are clear. How is this thing you're trying to do? How is it done today? What are the limits of the current practice? What's new in your approach, and why do you think it will be successful? And then who cares? So if you're successful, what difference will it make? And the thing that's always helpful, the prompt that's helpful for me in response to this last question, is to imagine the world with your project completed and successful. What does it look like? How is it different? And how is it better? So you really want to be able to tell reviewers that, to give them a sense of why it's really important and what impact it's going to have. So the emphasis here is that the project is one step to achieving the goals of a larger program. The specific objectives of this proposal are exactly aligned with this larger overall vision that the program is trying to achieve. With respect to person, what about your background qualifies you to do this work? How will this project contribute to your long-term development as a scholar and an educator? So we talked a little bit about how different proposal types, different award types will have maybe different balances of what they want to see in terms of your professional development versus emphasis on the research project. So that's something that you'll want to keep an eye out for, but regardless, you need to answer that question. And then how will completing this particular project help to establish you as a leader in your field? So the emphasis here is that you have something to give and something to gain from the support offered through this funding organization or program. And then the third piece, which needs to not be given the least importance because it's actually the most often missed opportunity to put a proposal at advantageous place. So what institutional resources will help your research? What institutional resources will help your educational project? And what institutional resources will help your professional development? So the impacts of the project you're planning will be greater at UC Davis, or if you're proposing an award somewhere else, wherever the host institution is going to be, than they would be if the same project were proposed by an equally qualified individual at a different institution. So all of these pieces should should be available throughout your proposal documents. So I think sometimes there's an instinct to kind of map them so that you're addressing one in each, but they should really be, this information should be available to reviewers in each document as it makes sense. And this is the reason for that. So seasoned grant reviewers will admit to making up their minds on the very first page of a proposal and rarely change their posture as they read the rest of the document. So this can be really disheartening to be confronted with, given how much work often goes into preparing a proposal. So it's difficult to kind of confront this, but mostly it should be helpful in terms of if you're putting in the work for the proposal, how can you do this to your best advantage? So the key is to really put the most important information up front, make it easy for reviewers to find, so that they can, make a judgment that reflects on the information that you've included in your proposal. So one exercise that is sometimes helpful for kind of organizing information in this way is the 4-paragraph one-pager. So here in the first paragraph, you want to set the stage and lay out the problem. So who cares? Then you want to state the theme and your solution, as well as your specific objectives. So here's how you're going to address that. And then create a vision. So what? So this is the piece I was talking about, where you want to imagine the world with your project completed or this problem solved, and really communicate that to reviewers. And so thinking about writing this one-pager, which is very condensed, or maybe condensed isn't helpful, very concise, and addresses these key points, can really help you think about how you present other sections of an actual proposal. And so this is a little bit of cheating, but the one-pager technically also has this second page, and this is where you would outline other elements required to ensure program success. So things that would be in the proposal in other places that are also really important, but maybe not critical to communicating those key ideas. So this would be a timeline, tangible milestones, and a budget if that's required. So my colleague on the IRS team, Dr. Sarah Messbauer, shared with me these top 10 most common mistakes in humanities proposals. For the sake of time, I'm not going to read through each of them, but they'll be in the slides that we share, so you can take a look at that. And then in terms of writing goals for grad students and postdocs, it's really valuable to ask to critique grant proposals or fellowships of your advisor or mentor and other colleagues. Helpful to challenge yourself to write that 2-page research proposal that I just walked through, and then schedule a time to receive critiques and feedback with a group. And you can obtain templates and other grant writing resources from the IRS team on our Box Drive. So I'll share a link to that in a second. I want to just mention resources that are available to you in terms of proposal development from grad studies. So the student financial support team helps with actual award submission and will help to identify what's necessary for submission. So as soon as you decide that you're going to write a proposal to submit, I highly recommend contacting them. They'll help you figure out an appropriate timeline and also walk you through submission steps. The Grad Pathways Institute supports workshops on writing, along with the university writing program. So you can check out those resources. And then I'm within the analysis and policy unit, and I support grad student and postdoc grant writing workshops as well. This is a link to that box folder from the IRS team. So you can see there are a number of resources here. The IRS team primarily supports faculty. So these are geared mostly toward faculty awards, but you can see there's a grad student fellowships and awards folder. And Stephanie had mentioned there's a grant writing bootcamp series of sessions and workshops. So there are materials for that you can look at as well. And again, this is a recommendation from my colleague, Sarah Messbauer. She says this is the one book that humanists need for proposal development. And that is all I have. So I did run a little long, but we have a few minutes for questions. And like I said, if you have questions in the chat that don't get answered, I can share responses with Stephanie.
Thank you, Aury. I'm going to stop recording now. And so I invite you all to join in whatever way you like, whether that's through the chat or just by unmuting yourself.